Hello everybody and welcome to Chrono Plays in the Real World, the insanely popular MMO with 7 billion users and rising, insane complexity, ultra-realistic graphics, and just like any other free-to-play MMO, kinda sucks unless you have the money to afford the upgrades. Today, we will be playing with a relatively old piece of hardware in technological speak, as it was released in November of last year. However, before I begin, I do want to give a little bit of background. This guy right here was my previous cell phone. This is the Nexus 1. And the reason that I point this out mostly is because the phone that I have now is one hell of a technological step up. And my opinion of this phone may be a little biased because of that massive technological step up. And that phone is the very shiny, very pretty, very fingerprint magnet-y phone, the Nexus 4. Yes, it is solid black from what you guys can see, I'm sure. But it is truly a Nexus phone, made by LG. But before we dig into the phone itself, let's take a look at the packaging, because the packaging is the first thing that you're going to see, thus it is extremely important. And this is what you see when you first open your box. It is kind of promising. If y'all remember when I did the Ouya unboxing, I was quite disappointed at the Ouya packaging because it was the bland, generic black packaging. You know, the packaging that Apple pioneered way back in the day that I've always found terribly annoying. Come on, people, be creative with your packaging. But hey, this is promising. It's colorful, it has a picture of the phone, and look, on the side, it actually says the model of the phone. Holy crap, and it gets even better. There's words on the back of the box. It tells you all about the phone in marketing speak, which is not terribly surprising and not terribly interesting. But that's okay. But that's definitely promising. But, however, if we look inside, we see generic black box with bland silver Nexus on it. Ah, well, I guess they gave up on the box. You know, they did that. That's a bonus. Inside of the box, which is the most important part, we have a USB wall charger, which at this point I'm sure everybody watching this has at least 5 of these things. I know I do. We have a 4-foot micro USB cable, which oddly enough, even though I think I have like at least 8 of these, you can never have enough of them and you can never find them when you need them. So more is usually better. We have the phone itself, and then we have this thing right here, which probably looks to you like a broken piece of metal. Well, what it is, and you probably won't be able to see it very well on camera, is actually a tool that came with the phone to open up the side of the phone here, right here, which you probably can't see. It is a little tiny point to pull out the micro SIM slot, which is good because I don't have a paperclip that small to open it, so I'm quite glad that they included that inside the box. Now, let's actually take a look at the phone. As we saw, there's the micro SD slot right here. We have the standard volume rocker on the side here. On the bottom, we have a micro USB port that also doubles as a special kind of HDMI port. I kind of forget the name of the port, but hey, USB, charging, micro HDMI kind of ish. Hey, you can't argue with that. That's actually pretty awesome. This little tiny hole right here isn't very well documented, but I would assume that is the microphone for when you're actually talking on the phone. And here are just standard Torx screws. They're a little tiny, but I know I have the screwdriver to get into that. So hey, I mean, standardized screws. One step above the Apple. On this side, we have absolutely nothing except for the power button. On the top, we have another little hole that is documented. This is another microphone, which I would assume is for, like, either background noise or just the generalized microphone when you're using it in other situations. And we have a standard headphone jack, which supports the microphone-headphone combination. On the back, we have the 8-megapixel rear-facing camera, an LED flash for said camera. We have the Nexus logo. We have the LG Pac-Man logo, the FCC warning, which is terribly boring, and we have the external speaker, which I was mildly disappointed that it means we have a rear-facing speaker, which is kind of goofy when you're holding it in your hand, but considering how small this thing is, it's not terribly surprising. On the front, the important parts, we have a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera. We have ambient light sensors, which I'm assuming is for when you put it up to your ear, it will turn off the screen so you don't actually dial with your earlobe. We have the speaker used for talking, and we have this 4.7 from corner to corner inch screen, which is a high-resolution screen, it's quite impressive, but I will show that off later. Down at the bottom here, which cannot be seen unless it's actually lit, and right now it's not, is a notification light, which I believe is the standard 3-color LED, so it can change colors depending on what your notification is. And that's pretty much it for the phone. Well, hardware-wise anyways, and that's pretty cool. So let's take a look at this thing. Well, we got a nice screen. It's relatively bright, pretty nice. And we have a complaint about the SIM card removal, which I should have expected. So let's restart this thing. Now, this thing is not terribly fast to reboot itself, but it doesn't really have to be. I mean, how many times do you reboot your phone? Not often at all. And there it is with the Google logo, emphasizing that this is Google's phone, which it is. And we have the standard Nexus boot logo, which is actually mildly disappointing considering how the Nexus 1 booted. I can't show you now because my Nexus 1 is actually running the Cyanogen mod for the Nexus, well, for Android operating systems in general, and it's got a different boot menu. Alright, so let's take a quick look at this screen. And it's complaining that it just booted and my phone has no idea what it's doing, and it does that all the time. Let's take a quick look at our screen. I happen to have a movie that is perfect for displaying. Now, you won't be able to see it because this camera right now is recording in 720p, but this is an HD movie. Specifically, it is Cintel from Blender Studios. And it is running at 1920 by 818, so not quite 1080, vertically anyways. It is HD horizontally, but not quite HD vertically, hence the letterboxes right here, and it is a very, very pretty display. I was quite impressed when I first saw this video start playing, and yeah, I was just absolutely amazed at how well this played, and it's nice and smooth motion. There's no jumpies or anything like that, and I like it. And as you could see, the screen auto changed its brightness level based on the ambient light around it, and we can change that here. Just dimmest setting, medium, brightest setting. Now this screen is fairly bright, however in direct sunlight it is still quite hard to see. That's not too terribly surprising considering it's a standard LED screen. Set you back to automatic. Now, as for the power, this phone has inside of it a quad-core 1.5 gigahertz processor with 2 gig of RAM. Now, I'll let that sink in for a second. This is a 1.5 gigahertz quad-core Snapdragon processor with 2 gig of RAM. I've been looking at business class PCs that have less power than this phone right here. That is a bit insane. Now, I'm not going to look too in-depth into the software itself, because this is all standard stuff that's in the new Android 4.2.2. That is a review for a completely different time and not something I need to concern myself with at this point. But what I do care about is the main reason why I decided to upgrade from my Nexus 1 after so long, and that is that right there, a program called Ingress. Now, it's not going to show me anywhere near where I am, and we're not going to see it run properly because I don't have the GPS enabled. But the reason that I upgraded the phone is because playing on the Nexus 1, it crashes over and over and over again. It runs so terribly slow and poor, and it just was in general a problem. However, this one, it is nice and smooth, and yeah, okay, right now it has absolutely no idea where I am. I don't even think I'm in the right city. Holy crap, I don't recognize any of those roads. But it's nice and smooth and slick. I have not seen it go below 30 frames per second. It's very, very nice phone hardware-wise. Boink. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There is three things that has kind of going against it right now. One is the sheer size of this phone. Now, you may not have noticed because I have relatively large hands, but this phone is big. It's not huge like the Samsung Note 2, I believe it is ginormous, but this could pass as a small tablet. I mean, if we compare it to our Nexus 1 here, we can see that there is a considerable size difference. It's kind of unwieldy if you have small hands, I can imagine, but it hasn't been giving me too many problems because, as I said, I have fairly large hands. The second thing that it has going against it, and you might have noticed when I was going over what's all on the phone, is there's no micro SD slot. And it's quite disappointing as this thing only holds 16 gig for storage. Yes, that's separate from the 2 gig of RAM, but it is still 16 gig of storage, only 16 gig. And this is the biggest size phone you can get right now. There are rumors of a 32 gig, but I have not heard any confirmation of a 32 gig version coming out. Now, because there's no micro SD slot, I would highly recommend spending a little bit of extra money and picking up the 16 gig version. And if you use all the cloud tools like Google Music and Google Books and all that fun crap, you probably won't have a problem right now. But back when I bought the Nexus 1, I didn't exactly have a problem with 8 gig of storage that I had on my micro SD slot. Now, the third and final problem that I have with this phone is that it has no user replaceable battery. You cannot pop the back off of this thing and pull out the battery and replace it with a new one, a bigger one, or whatever. It has to be taken apart by somebody who actually knows what they're doing. I looked up a teardown of this phone, and while it's relatively simple, and by relatively I mean as compared to the iPhone, while it's relatively simple to tear apart, the battery is pretty seriously glued to the case of this phone. So if you slip even the slightest bit, you can either puncture the battery, which would end up being a terribly bad thing, or you can start breaking components of the phone. So I don't recommend an average user try to replace the battery on this thing. There is also something I did learn when I researched this phone, and that is that the chip that has the 16 gig of storage on this phone while it is not something where they kind of just went, we'll throw in a micro SD slot and throw in a non-user replaceable micro SD card, it's actually a chip soldered onto the motherboard. Now, rumor has it, I've not seen anybody confirm that this is absolutely true, but rumor has it that the chip used in this phone has a 64 and 128 gig counterpart that uses the same pinning and is the same size. So theoretically, if you're really good, you should be able to replace the chip on the motherboard with a bigger chip. However, because that chip is surface mount, and obviously soldering on surface mount is itsy bitsy tiny soldering, I wouldn't recommend it for all but the most hardcore circuit experts, I guess. My dad could do it probably. I know I can't. I don't have anywhere near that kind of soldering ability. But again, you kind of have to be an expert in that kind of thing to upgrade it. So this is not going to be something that the average user could replace if, unlike, say, my Nexus 1 over here, which if we pop off the back, sometimes it's easier than others, we can see that I have a user replaceable battery right there, which you can actually buy bigger batteries for this phone. However, after 6 years, I have never had back problems with this battery, so I'm not terribly worried about this one. We have our standard SIM slot, which, for the record, this is a standard size SIM card, and that's a micro SIM card. I had to go to the T-Mobile store to get that thing to actually work. And we have our micro SD slot right there. Yes, okay, I have to pop out the battery to pull out the micro SD slot, but I tolerated it, and I could easily upgrade it if I ever bothered buying a new micro SD card. I like that idea. I'm quite disappointed that LG did not include a micro SD slot on this thing, or a user replaceable battery. So for those two things, you lose a point. Actually, let me rephrase that. For those two things, you lose 1 point each. So yes, out of 10, I give this phone an 8 for those reasons. And that's it. That's the only complaint I have over this phone so far. I mean, the audio quality is crystal clear. I don't know how I do it. I'm not an audiophile, but I can actually tell a difference when I plug in my really high quality headphones between these two phones. I can actually tell a difference that this phone is better. Which is kind of silly because I'm not using lossless audio or anything like that. I'm using Google Streaming. So I don't know what that actually means. It might just mean that that phone had such a crappy audio system that this phone just takes advantage of all of the good stuff. I don't know. I really don't know. However, I quite like it. It does very well for what it does. I'm quite glad that I bought it. Yes, okay, I've only had it for, 2-3 days? And in, a month, 2 months, that opinion may change. But as of right now, I'm quite glad I got it. So I would say that if you're looking at a phone, and you can't afford the new great things, the Samsung Note 2 or whatever, that are like $800, pick up a Nexus 4. You won't be terribly disappointed in it at all. You might have a problem with storage. You probably won't have a problem with the battery, but you will like the phone. So, I will say to you guys as always, keep playing the game and have fun.